For this embargoed news conference. Just a reminder that everything we talk about on Bill 201 that we're going to be tabling this afternoon is embargoed until the bill is tabled. Typically that happens around 3 o'clock. That does not mean the embargo is lifted at 3 o'clock. It's not until the bill is actually tabled. Also, if anybody has a non-topic question, feel free to ask it, and that is not embargoed, so you can use that. With that, I'll hand things over to the leader of Alberta's New Democrats and the leader of the official of opposition in Alberta, Naheed Nenshi.
Well, thank you, Kirk, and hello, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. We're gathered, as always, here on Treaty 6 land, and of course, we acknowledge the Métis people, the Otipemisiwak Nation, for their deep connection to this land. All summer, we've been talking to Albertans. And we've heard the same things over and over again. More and more Albertans are treading water, worried about going under, struggling to make ends meet. They're working harder than ever, but they're falling further behind. And the UCP government has done nothing to address the cost of living. Indeed, things that are directly under their control, like affordable housing, utilities, and insurance, have skyrocketed. And they've done nothing to support people's paychecks. You deal with the cost of living by reducing costs, but also by making sure people have decent incomes. And Alberta's New Democrats believe very strongly that if you go to work every day, if you get up in the morning and pack your lunch and put on your pants and go to work, you deserve to live a life without financial fear. And that's why today, New Democrats are ready to take action. That's why today New Democrats have introduced new legislation that would increase wages and support workers' paychecks. And this legislation is part of a broader effort that we'll be talking about this fall on how we protect your paycheck. Today, Kathleen Ganley, the MLA for Calgary Mountain View, has tabled Bill 201, the Protect Workers' Pay Act. If passed, this bill will do three things. It will raise the minimum wage. It will eliminate the youth minimum wage imposed by the UCP, and it would protect the tips of workers. Alberta's minimum wage hasn't changed since 2018, and as of this month, it's the lowest in the country. Alberta is also one of the only provinces with a youth minimum wage, $13 an hour for anyone under 18. And the government refuses to act. Their inaction on wages is deepening economic insecurity. It's ensuring thousands of workers are being left behind. So Bill 201 is about restoring fairness. It's about helping Albertans deal with rising costs. It's about making sure no one is penalized for their age. It's about making sure workers get to keep what they earn. And it's about making sure Albertans can afford life's essentials. I'll turn it over to Kathleen now.
Thank you. Alberta has the lowest minimum wage in the country. And the top issue for most Albertans is that they're struggling to afford the basics like rent and groceries. Rising costs and stagnant wages are the source of this problem. Bill 201, the Protect Workers' Pay Act, proposes several amendments to the Alberta Employment Standards Act. First, it would increase Alberta's minimum wage to $16 this year, $17 in October of 2026, and $18 in October of 2027. After that, the minimum wage would be indexed to inflation so that wages will keep pace with the cost of living. We chose $18 because had the minimum wage remained indexed to inflation since 2018, we would be around $18.45 or $18.50 now. Bill 201 would also eliminate the youth minimum wage. Currently, students and youth under 18 can be paid as low as $13 an hour. The minimum wage reduction was implemented by the UCP government and has done nothing to support youth employment. On the contrary, Alberta has the highest youth unemployment in the country. Young Albertans deserve equal pay for equal work. This legislation would ensure they're no longer penalized just for being under 18. Closing this gap is critical for students between 15 and 17 who are trying to save for university. In fact, some students go to university at the age of 17. Finally, Bill 201 would introduce tip protection provisions, ensuring that gratuities go directly to the workers who earn them. When people tip, they expect it to go to the worker who is serving them or to be fairly distributed among servers, hosts, food runners, and cooks. What they don't expect is for that money to be skimmed or go into the pocket of the manager or the owner. As cash tipping declines, weak regulations make it easier for employers to redirect tips from card payments away from staff and to management. This bill would make sure that the employees who worked for the tips earn the tips. It excludes managers and owners from the tip pool unless they perform the same duties as staff. So small business owners who work as a server or a cook in their own restaurant could still be included. Most provinces have already stepped up and passed similar legislation to protect workers' tips, and it's time that Alberta did the same. As part of this work, we would also consult with small businesses and others to talk about what would support them to implement these proposed measures. Bill 201, the Protect Workers' Pay Act, is part of a broader affordability agenda of Alberta's New Democrats, and we'll be bringing it forward this session. We want to help Albertans keep pace with the rising cost of living and ensure that everyone can afford life's essentials, from groceries to rent to utility bills. Bill 201 is a start, and we call on this government to join us in protecting workers' paychecks. Thank you, and we're happy to take your questions.
All right, we'll start with questions in the room in just a second, but if you are joining us by Zoom and you'd want to ask a question, please just raise your hand and we'll be with you momentarily. Starting in the room with Sean Amato from City News.
Hi, Mr. Nenshi. So pretty sure what the government is going to say about this bill or how they're going to respond to it, because we've been asking them about the minimum wage for weeks, a few months. Essentially what they say is that raising the minimum wage will be bad for employment, particularly youth unemployment, which is a serious concern in Alberta already. So how do you respond to that criticism?
Yeah, so, I actually am an economics and finance guy, and I'm warned that I shouldn't be too Professor Nenshi about these things, but I think we need a little Professor Nenshi at this point. So yes, it's very true that if you look at a supply and demand, microeconomics 101, that increases in wages do tend to increase unemployment. However, that happens within a band. And what we've seen right now is that we have the lowest minimum wage and the highest youth unemployment, which means that supply and demand are completely imbalanced. In short, it means people are not seeking employment because they're just not paying enough for them to be able to get by. That's one reason. And so what we've seen in studies over the last decade as different jurisdictions have increased their unemployment, their minimum wage, is that the increase in minimum wage has very little, if no impact on unemployment rates. We've seen that consistently across jurisdictions when the minimum wages are too low. And in fact, there are a number of small businesses with whom we've consulted who said, yeah, we need to increase it because I have to pay more to attract workers anyway. So let's get the bad actors out of the system. So yes, if the minimum wage had increased with inflation, as it should have, as it does in every other province, we wouldn't have this problem. It would just be a natural cost of doing business. And in fact, one of the reasons we're being judicious about the increase in the minimum wage at $1 a year is because we don't want to have that impact on business and on unemployment that leveling up immediately would do. But we've got to get back to a more fair level and a level that matches both inflation and matches other jurisdictions.
Follow-up for Kathleen. So NDP Bill 210, I believe, attempted to do similar things on workers' tips. That failed. That didn't come into effect. Why do you think this will be any different? And what is the difference, I guess, between the two bills, or is it exactly the same?
So the tip protection portion is very similar. And it's because we think this is still a problem. We're still hearing from workers that their tips are being removed from them. And people in the public expect that when they're tipping, it will go to the worker in front of them. So basically, we're proposing it because it continues to be the same problem. The bill also includes the provisions around minimum wage. And the idea here is the affordability crisis that faces Albertans, the thing that people are struggling with every single day, is in part driven by costs, but it's in part driven by wages as well. So we will do everything we can to ensure that those workers are able to afford the basics.
Can I jump in on that? And Kathleen, you would actually know this because you're the whip, but I believe 210 died on the order paper, didn't it? Or did we vote on it?
I think we voted on it.
Okay, you're right, I'm wrong. I wasn't in the house.
Welcome.
Thank you. I just want to say this, every one of us, if we're lucky enough to be able to afford to go out to eat, has been confronted with this tip inflation on the little terminals, seeing the numbers going up and up and up. And as Kathleen pointed out, one of the reasons for that is because there are some unscrupulous operators out there who have increased the amount on the tip terminals because they're skimming that money, not giving it directly to people who perform the service. We believe if you do the work, you deserve the pay. And it's as simple as that. Other jurisdictions have done this. Others have gone even further on this. But we believe that if you're tipping, you deserve to know the person who gave you that service is getting the tip.
Right now, nobody online has a hand up to ask a question, so I'll give you last call on that and just remind everybody that this is an embargoed news conference and that details cannot be released until after the bill is tabled this afternoon, which typically happens at about 3 o'clock.
And since you're in the room, Sean, you have anything else?
Yeah, awesome.
Sean
You
Amato,
came
City News.
down.
So we're seeing new polling showing your popularity. You are now more popular than the Premier is, seeing a general trend of her popularity going down, and that was before the back-to-work legislation and the notwithstanding clause.
And the abandoning Alberta for fully half of the fall sitting for her vacation junket, yes.
You've told me before that polls are polls, but I gotta ask, what do you think of this poll?
Every politician needs to say the same thing, which is the only poll that matters is on election day, and the polls that happen in between are for dogs, firefighters, and perhaps one other profession, fitness enthusiasts. So, that said, these polls are, I think, reflective of what we're seeing on the ground. The ground is really shifting. Albertans are waking up to this government. The veil has fallen as to who this government really is. It's not a Peter Lougheed conservative government or a Ralph Klein conservative government. This is an extremist, radical group that thinks nothing of trampling on the Charter of Rights and doesn't care about your kids. They engineered this strike. They don't care about schools. They don't care about healthcare. They only care about power. And it's very clear to me that Albertans are starting to see that. So now our job is to continue to hold this government to account and continue to remind Albertans that, look, these guys aren't self-correcting. They're not going to fix it. If you want a better Alberta, you have to elect a better government.
Yesterday, union leaders told us that they are preparing for a potential general strike in Alberta. I'm not sure when or if that's going to happen, but there are some people that want to see that happen. Do you want to see that happen? Is that something that's necessary, or do you think the government can do some things to avert that issue?
Well, certainly threats like this in Ontario cause the government to repeal their use of the notwithstanding clause. This government won't do that. They are too stubborn. They never admit they were wrong. They never apologize. But what actions like this, and not just in labor, actions like this are happening everywhere. Students are staging walkouts in the next couple of days. Parents are very upset and they're organizing in their own neighborhoods and their own communities. The amount of kids who showed up at school yesterday wearing red should have been a big signal. Of course, the Minister of Education is now subject to a recall petition. So the government will rue this day. They've woken up a sleeping giant. They've woken up Albertans as to who they really are, and this is a big problem. And I think one of the most interesting things, general strike or no general strike, one of the most interesting things is that workers representing 3 million members across Canada came together for an emergency meeting with just a few hours' notice and determined that Danielle Smith is the greatest threat to workers' rights in this entire country. So this is all of the government's own creation.
All right, everyone, thank you. That concludes this morning's news conference. And of course, please mind how you go.
Thank you.